Hello Camilo, this is our video presentation about assessing speaking. We are Melanie Comte, Daniel Gálvez, and me, Ian Villalobos. Our presentation is divided into 6 points. The first one is about what is speaking. The second one is context and activity. Then national curriculum, interpretation and analysis, improvements and conclusions. First of all, what is speaking? We have two quotes that describe it. The first one is from Chani that says that speaking is the process of building and sharing meaning through the use of verbal and non-verbal symbols in a variety of contexts. The second quote is from Brown, Burns, and Joyce. They say that speaking is an interactive process of constructing meaning that involves producing, receiving, and processing information.
For this presentation, we are going to analyze one activity done in a 10th grade, and this was in Colegio Mirador, located in Puente Alto, during the unit of globalization. The objective of the class was to describe personal experiences using present perfect. This was a post activity that was an interview that consisted in 10 questions using the structure of Have You Ever. The idea is that one student asked the questions and the second student had to answer using the entire structure of present perfect. According to the national curriculum, there are 4 objectives in relation to the development of the speaking skill. And according to OA5, students are expected to present oral information about using different resources such as personal experiences, topics from other subjects, other cultures, and global issues. OA6 deals with participation in interaction and expositions, using some strategies, such as before speaking, while speaking, and after speaking. OA7 is to react to some texts through oral presentations or in discussion in groups. And OA8 is to demonstrate knowledge and understanding of use of language in conversations, discussion, and exposition by specific functions that are related to use of language. Taking into consideration the important concepts that we have discussed and studying during the course, such as validity, authenticity, interactiveness, impact, and practicality, we have used them to analyze the activity with these relevant concepts. First, in relation to validity, we have concluded that it has, but at some point, because according to the national curriculum, students are expected to express their experiences, and this activity aims at this type of activity or situation. But according to the objective of the class itself, it aims at describing their experiences, but considering the answer of the students and the situation itself, the interview, this activity aims at naming some experiences more than describing, since describing deals with a more detailed explanation about an experience. So in that way, it's not really consistent to what the class wants to achieve at the end. The second point, authenticity, we have concluded that it is authentic since it has to do with real world situations, especially students' experiences. And then students had to share their experiences, even though, and considering the context, and it is the first speaking activity from the students, even though it is a short speaking activity, since they only had to report or share 1 sentences, it is authentic. Interactiveness, we have the language, which is present perfect. Even though the topic that of the unit is globalization, it's not related to the activity, but it has the affective schemata, which is related to their experiences and that they express about their lives. So in that way, we are missing the topic because it's just about their experiences and not a specific one. And in relation to impact, we have concluded that these can have more impact in order to learn these things. It can be more meaningful than a worksheet, for example, or completing sentences that are not related to their life and that are not appealing to them. And finally, practicality. We have concluded that this activity has practicality because the teacher had the space, the time, students to interact, and a worksheet with the question and images that helped students to understand the question. Even though the book Assessing Speaking presents different ideas and information about this skill, we have selected the most relevant and useful ideas in relation to this activity. First, the author points out the difference between planned and unplanned speech. On the one hand, planned speech has to do when speakers have prepared their speech in advance, and it uses a more formal language. On the other hand, unplanned speech is when it occurs at the specific moment, and it's more informal. Considering this activity and also considering that even though it didn't include a broad use of language, we think that this activity uses unplanned speech because students didn't have time to prepare their answer. It was just at the moment when they were interviewed, and at the same time they interviewed their classmates. So this activity is related to an unplanned speech. Another key concept that the author of the text presents is interaction. According to the text, speaking is a social activity that involves interaction. And considering this activity that was not individual but in pairs, this activity uses interaction, and this can be more meaningful and more useful for students because when we speak, we also listen to the other classmate in this case. Another idea presented by the text is from the author him about the acronym of speaking, when S stands for situations, participants, ends, act, sequence, key, instrumentalities, norms, and genre. Considering the situation in the activity is the classroom itself with the students. The participants are students and teachers. The ends in this case is to accomplish the objective of the lesson that was previously mentioned. The act sequence is related to their personal experiences about the students. The key is that it is an informal situation in a friendly and comfortable environment. The instrumentalities is that this activity is spoken, is spontaneous, but we cannot analyze the English itself, such as accent or dialect, because the students have not developed these skills, and it's just to answer one sentence. The norms we have concluded that is the instructions that the teacher gave for this activity, and the genre is an interview. From this book, we also selected the idea of speaking tasks. According to the author of the text, speaking tasks can be seen as activities that involve speakers in using language for the purpose of achieving a particular goal or objective in a particular speaking situation. Considering this quote and the activity under analysis, we have concluded that This this is a speaking task, but it was adapted for students' proficiency and student level, because they are not allowed, they cannot produce a long speech. And as I said before, this was the first speaking activity that they have done. Another idea is pair interviews, and that encourages interaction and pair work and reduces the amount of time to examine, in this case from the teacher. So this, since it was an interview, this used pair work and encouraged interaction. So this idea was also applied in the activity that we are analyzing. And another idea is that when we use structured speaking tasks, the author of the text says that these type of activities or tasks are short and focus on one aspect, and that some activities allow more freedom, but the focus is on grammatical knowledge. And considering this activity, this is a structured speaking task because students need some guidance to make them speak. So this activity is short and it focused on one grammatical aspect or knowledge, which is present perfect. So in this case, this was a structured speaking task, but with the purpose of making students participate, interact, but using a specific grammatical knowledge.
In terms of interpretation and analysis of this activity, the text assessing speaking provide us with different types of speaking activities. For example, description of pictures, narrative tasks, explaining and predicting tasks, decision tasks, role plays and simulations, reacting in situation, and the last one, structured speaking tasks. I think that this activity falls into the category of structured speaking task. Another point, the concepts that the developers use in linguistically oriented definitions are typically vocabulary, grammar, and pronunciation. And in this case, I think that there is no difference, because grammar and pronunciation here are very important in order to produce something. Students must follow a language structure to speak. The third point is about test specifications. Test specifications are very important because students must have clear what they have to do and the objective and the instructions, etc. The fourth point is that it is important to provide students with real life context, interesting and dynamic material. The images, for example, need to evoke a meaning and ideas without using actual words. I think that this point in this activity is accomplished because the questions that are provided are very appealing to them. They are based on their real life situations that students go through. Another point is that feedback can be based on detailed specifications of learning goals. The goals must be specified concretely. This has to do with the objective of the activity and how clear it is for students in order to perform well. So feedback can happen. The idea is that feedback happen along with the test specifications and the objective of the activity. Speaking activities can be time consuming, and in that way pair or group tasks can be useful in order to save time. In this case, this point is accomplished because the activity that we described is a pair activity. And the last point is that peer evaluation can be recommended, not to replace teacher evaluation but to complement it. In this case, peer evaluation can be the following step of the pair activity, because in that way they can perform the activity together and then correct it together and then expect an answer from the teacher. But in that way, this activity is very dynamic because of that, the peer correction.
In the text, Luoma mentions that in order to know if our student's performance is good or bad, we have to define what a good and a bad performance is. We have to know the aspects that we will focus on when assessing our students. In this way, the author presents and evaluates a few models that are useful as a framework to guide us. One of these models is the communicative model in language teaching by Bachman and Palmer. This model has 5 components, which are the following: topical and language knowledge, personal characteristics, strategic competence, and affective factors. When analyzing our activity, we could identify 2 of these elements. On the one hand, we have the language knowledge dimension, because in the activity, students have had to answer questions from an interview and using the structure of present perfect. Also, when giving feedback, the teacher focused on this aspect. In relation to the affective factors, which are the emotional responses to a certain situation, in this case speaking, the teacher could observe that students were shy when trying to speak in English because it was their first speaking activity. Another important model that we have to mention is the speaking specific model by Bigate, which has been used in assessment and teaching programs. This model shows speaking as a process where processing and reciprocity are 2 fundamental concepts. According to this, in terms of processing, speaking requires simultaneous action. The words are being spoken as they are being decided and as they are being understood. Reciprocity conditions mean that the speakers have to adapt to their listeners and adjust what they say according to the listener's reaction. Even though the activity was an interview, we have to. Even though that the activity was an interview, it somehow required these 2 elements of processing and reciprocity. However, we think that it was limited and not as spontaneous as speaking is, because students have had to answer according to a certain structure, giving short answers and not adding more information to the answers. In relation to the improvements, and as we already know, feedback is fundamental in the assessment process. Feedback will provide us with information about our students' performance, therefore, and hopefully we will use it to help our students to improve and learn. In the case of the activity, feedback was given to the whole class after the activity finished. In order to correct the answers, the teacher made the same questions from the activity to some students. They had to answer by using the correct structure of present perfect. The teacher gave direct feedback when students didn't respond correctly. For example, if a student replied, "I have eat" instead of "I have eaten," the teacher would say, "I have eat" or "I have eaten" in order to correct. However, we agreed that feedback should be improved and more clear, because we can't assume that all students understood the correction just by listening to them. The teacher should have used the whiteboard to make the corrections too. Our conclusions are the following. First, fostering speaking skill will help learners to improve and develop communication, which is essential in learning English as a foreign language. But also will help students to develop social skills in terms of interaction, confidence, and nonverbal language. Second, the speaking skill goes beyond language knowledge. For example, when assessing this skill, we have to focus on language knowledge. However, the speaking skill goes beyond this aspect because it consists in different other elements. For example, the way we interact, how we speak, and so on. The models that we mentioned before can be a good framework to help us to consider other elements.